Hi, and thank you for tuning into the Fight Zone podcast. In this episode, I talk with a friend of mine, coach and mixed martial artist based in Melbourne, Australia. Coach Denis Kelly is BJJ black belt, Krav Maga black belt, Zendokai black belt, Judo brown belt, and registered Sambo Australia coach, registered boxing and kickboxing trainer, Kettlebell Instructor. Denis is also Victorian Welterweight MMA champion, and he competed extensively in BJJ grappling, freestyle wrestling, Sambo, and Muay Thai. We had extensive talk and touched many subjects as using technique breakdowns, organizing your support team on competitions and planning your fight career. Denis coaches in Australia Combat Sport Academy in Melbourne. Get in touch with his team at acsamelbourne.com.au, Facebook ACSA Melbourne, and Denis also has a great coaching blog which I strongly recommend at www.dkmmacoaching.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did.
Why do we fight? To protect home and family. To preserve balance and bring harmony. For our kind, the true question is, what is worth fighting for? The Fight is All podcast.
Should be on.
Okay, good stuff.
How are you, brother, there in the zone? You guys
What's
how you guys there in the zone? You know, in Russia, when someone is in prison, we call it the zone.
Okay, yeah. It's well, we're pretty much used to it now, but I think we're kind of moving in the right direction. So hopefully, won't be too long until things are back to normal. And yeah, I think everybody will appreciate their freedom much more after that.
Yeah, well, you just had a short throw to get a dickhead of premier who wants to play like
Much
Lenin,
control.
Stalin, and Hitler at the same time in
Yeah,
21st century. Yeah. Well, I guess it will backlash on him sooner or later. That was sheer stupidity. But yeah, the main thing is you guys are good, and if you're on the way of recovery, that's the best. That's the most.
yeah. Well, hopefully it'll all kind of blow over eventually, and life will get back to normal.
It always does. It depends how much time it will take.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, let's go to martial arts talk. Just
Okay.
just what difference? Can you please tell me your martial arts story? Why, when, where you start training? Your history of training through the years. It's always interesting. Everyone has his own.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I started doing traditional karate back in Ireland in 1993. So yeah, that's quite long, nearly, coming up to 30 years ago now. Yeah, I didn't have too much interest in other sports, but I always had a little bit of interest in martial arts, and then, I was able to start doing some karate training, and then I remember the very first week I went along to the club, I didn't really enjoy it too much. It was a little bit boring, just, learning how to do blocks and stuff like that. But then the second week, they allowed us to do some sparring. So it was just like the semi-contact sparring. But that's the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And I was like, just really amazed with how much fun it was.
How
And
old was you at that time?
I think it was 14. 14, yeah. And I didn't really, yeah, I suppose, when you're at school, you have play fights, but I never really enjoyed that too much. I was always, I was scared I was going to get in trouble. So that was the first time I was able to have a fight, or almost like a fight, without getting in trouble for it. And it was a lot of fun. So basically, the first time I was able to spar, yeah, I just became hooked on it, and then I've been doing it ever since. And then I think not long after I started doing karate, then I was watching TV. on a Friday night, and I saw a clip of the UFC, or it was like a report about the UFC. It was, they'd only had one UFC or maybe two UFCs at that time. I was like, wow, it looks, at first I thought it wasn't real because I thought they wouldn't allow people to get locked into a cage and then try to kill each other. But then when they sort of showed it, and they showed how it wasn't as dangerous as what it looked. And then ever since then, as I was just always really interested in just like the real side of martial arts, rather than the competition side. So competition side, you've got rules where it's usually going to make it safer, or it'll make one set of techniques work. Whereas the real side is like, what if we take away all the rules and then see what actually works? So that was how I got started with it.
Yeah, well, the first UFCs, they really was barely had any rules, pretty much like not really kill people.
Yeah.
But that was not also very clear. It was fun, and even groin shots was real. Like there was this famous scene of I don't know, like I think it was an Asian guy who had another guy in cruise. I think it was like bumped him in the groin or something like that. It was like
yeah.
Oh, and like no gloves.
Yeah.
I think Tank Abbott was the first one who actually had gloves on.
Yeah.
Before that, I don't really remember anyone like really using gloves. They was like pretty much bare knuckles.
Yeah.
Was interesting. But again,
Yeah.
it was different though. There was no time limit, so like
Yeah.
you had like these legendary fights, like I think Royce Gracie and Frank Shamrock have one of them. It was 33 minutes. That was crazy.
I think there was the one with Royce Gracie and Dan Severn, and it actually, the pay-per-view was only booked for a certain amount of time, and the fight kept going after the pay-per-view had already cut off, so people had paid to watch it, and they didn't know what the result was. And then the internet wasn't as good back then as well, so then people didn't find out what the result was for a couple months later.
When I started watching it, there was no internet. There was a kind of it was not illegal just because there was no rules for that. We just went on like on a street market, and there was these cassettes. There was recording it.
That was the same.
We was buying from there, and there was pre-recorded so many times you barely see features of fighters at faders, and they're more like silhouettes and just bare features. So I was so interested. He was buying them and watching, because there was like pre-recorded so much time. It was like kind of blurry.
Yeah.
But it was so interesting. I was doing kickboxing at that time. Was just gathering and watching and say, wow, look at this, and like you can do that. It was crazy, and it was really crazy because the beginning was really fun because there was the styles was fairly pure.
Yeah.
So the people was not cross-trained, and then you find out like, that guy's a kickboxer, that guy's like, and of course like jiu-jitsu with Royce Gracie at that time. He was super impressed because he was more than the other guys, and it was madness.
Yeah. In some ways, in a lot of ways, I think it was probably a lot more interesting back then because. Obviously, I love still watching MMA now and still watching UFC, but I think it's become a little bit boring because everybody fights exactly the same, and almost everybody does the same, and they say the same thing in the interviews. And whereas back then you had, you had a wrestler who would turn up to fight and just use his wrestling, and you had a jiu-jitsu person who would turn up to fight, and you had like, fighters coming from backgrounds that you hadn't really seen before, so you wouldn't know what to expect from them. But then over time, I think people just figured out, or fighters figured out, that if we want to win, we have to do this. This is the safe way to win, or this is the best way to win. And probably now it's getting to the stage where they're not just thinking about winning, they're thinking about, how can I get invited back? So if I fight like this, if I throw a lot of punches, then I'll get invited back for the next show and they'll extend my contract. So it's in some ways I think it was maybe more interesting back then, whereas now it's everybody looks the same, everybody fights the same, with just a few variations.
Yeah, I agree with that. From a spectator's point of view, back in the days was more interesting because it was more random. And one thing that I missed from that time was the tournament battle.
Yeah,
I think that kind of determines more fairly the champion, because they don't have so much management involved. They cannot choose who they have to fight with. So the pretty much the best guy wins as the
yeah,
best strategy, who is able, to save himself through the tournament, because part of competing in tournament is saving yourself so you can fight another fight.
yeah,
While like the single matches nowadays, you can throw everything in one fight, but you don't have to worry that you have to fight after.
yeah. Because it's going to be a few
Which,
months. Yeah,
yeah, which is interesting strategy. Which now with not now, like until recently with IMF, that comes back, because one of the one of the part of the art of fighting is how to save yourself, not only to win a fight, but also to save yourself to fight another fight.
yeah,
Which I think it's a fair part of the fighting art. It's
yeah,
important. But from other point of view, it's that's natural development of the sport. Fighters to figure out how to fight in mixed rules, and I think while back in the days was really mixed martial arts, now MMA by itself is a style. It's an art by itself.
yeah,
So from my perspective now, from coaching perspective, now it's more interesting, because how you can figure out like to build a complex fight, because uh, as a coach you probably would agree, back in the days is way easier, like the other guy is the wrestler, how to fight the wrestler in
yeah, yeah.
general, so creating
Well,
strategy is
it's more predictable.
way
Yeah,
more simplistic. Well, this guy's a fighter, I'm gonna take him to the ground and I'm gonna beat him.
yeah,
But now it's a bit more complex, because so this guy has these good moves, but he's also good on the cage, or like he's good on wrestling, and but not good on the bottom ground, but he's good on top. So there is way more sophisticated
yeah. It's
strategies.
a lot more factors to consider. Yeah. I suppose back then people were a lot more one-dimensional. Like you could be really good at just one thing, whereas now everybody, most people have to be well-rounded and good at a lot of things to be successful.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was, but yeah, historical fights are fun
Yeah,
for sure, to see this pure style squashing, uh and that give all this boom of the martial arts, because they got exposed. There is this thing in martial arts, everyone wants to be a master and a legend, and and back just before this actually started, every coach or master was telling like ridiculous stories, and as a kid you believe, like you want your coach to be the best, the
yeah,
master, to do this, to do that, and you just hear those stories, which yeah, they got, many of them got fairly well
yeah.
exposed.
Well, it's interesting because I remember one of my karate instructors, right around the time when I started watching the UFC, the early UFCs, one of the big, what we say like crazes, martial arts crazes at that time was pressure point fighting, where people could just like hit you in the arm and knock you out. And one of my instructors, he got really into it, so he was demonstrating how to do the pressure points and knock people out. And then I asked him, why doesn't anybody use this in the UFC? Like, if it's, these people are fighting, and you've got someone that's like, 160 kilos on top of you. Why wouldn't you just pressure point knock? And he said, oh, maybe they don't know them, or they don't know how to do them properly, or something like that. And then one of my other, there was another friend of mine at school who he did another martial art, but they did pressure point fighting in it. And then, in the lunchtime, I was like, can you demonstrate it on me to see if it works? And he tried to do it on me, and it didn't work. I was still awake. And, there was no explanation for it. But it's interesting that, people did believe in all that kind of stuff. And then, this simple way of testing it came along, and that probably took care of a lot of the nonsense martial arts that were out there.
Well, you know what's more amazing? There's still people who believe in this
Yeah,
shit.
yeah, this still
That's
is.
way more amazing. Now I
Yeah,
have the UFC. you have professional fighters who involve every bit possible to win, like dietitians, breeding specialists now, whatever you can imagine, no using pressure points
Yeah,
for some reason, except Anderson Silva in recent years, he tried and he failed drastically with, he fought in kind of Wing Chun trial stuff, and
yeah,
he blatantly failed, even being like such a big legend in the sport. I really sorry to see that, like, which only show that doesn't matter how good you are, you can still fall into bullshit.
yeah,
But what is amazing, there are people who still getting hooked in that. Like here in Australia, like people who listen like from other parts of the world, there is this thing called Arakan, which is
yeah,
this
yeah,
imaginary style from a guy who probably never fight for real, but he created awesome business model. You see this guy. I live here on Broad Beach. I see those guys like all the time in the park when I go for a like, man, they're just like what you guys are thinking.
yeah,
But people always want this easy way, to achieve stuff easy, and that always gives room for fraud and for all these people who explore this. Oh, that's gonna be easy, like oh, these people don't know. Oh, they're just professional fighters. They're like they forget the internal work and all this stuff, and people keep buying it. It's just amazing. I'm amazed how crazy people can be.
yeah. It's interesting. I think it must be just something about fighting where even though the evidence is right in front of you about what works and what doesn't work, you can still kind of pull the wool over people's eyes. So it's interesting.
Yeah, well, honestly, I kind of admire the marketing strategy of this guy, of the Arakan people.
Yeah,
Very clever in this section, but I'm amazed how people still buying this shit. It's just amazing. It's just kind of sad and kind of funny in the same way. It's
yeah.
just great.
Well, I can sort of understand it in some ways because I think that everybody wants, or a lot of people feel the need they want to be able to defend themselves. And then maybe if they go along to say your club or my club, and then like they learn they take a few lessons in Sambo or whatever, and they're gonna think this is too hard, I don't want to do that. Then they walk down the street and the other guy shows them some magical pressure point attacks, and they think, oh, this is much easier, I'll just go to the magical pressure point guy instead. So people will always, I think, or a lot of people will go for the easy option. So it's the same as, are they going to eat healthily? Or are they going to go to the McDonald's drive-through? So even though they know that one's not probably the best for them, they'll always go for the easy option. So
Well, there's a famous I think he's American writer, very good kind, who passed away recently. He's a fantasy writer. He has he recently passed. That's why I remember him. He has this a very good. Uh, it was a great sequence of books, Sword of the Truth, and one of the books was called the first rules of the magician. And the first rule of the magicians is people are stupid. They're gonna believe to everything they wish to be true, or they're afraid to be true. So that
yeah,
applies to what we're talking about, but also to the times that we're living in.
yeah,
So that's the first rule of magician, that people are gonna believe to everything they wish to be true, or they're afraid to be true.
yeah, yeah, that
And
makes sense.
it actually works. It's true. People do that. Okay, let's get back to your history. So, like you started with karate.
Yep.
You had this experience. Like you start watching and see what happens after.
So yeah, I pretty much at that stage, karate was the only sort of martial art that was around. So I continued training in karate for I think that was like 3 or 4 years, and then I moved to London to go to university. And then when I went to London, there's a lot more variety of martial arts training available over there. So that's when I started doing Muay Thai, and I did a little bit of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu at my university as well. And then I think probably a few years later, then I started doing MMA training at a Pancrase, so it was a club that was affiliated with Pancrase. So that was the first place I really did any proper MMA training or grappling, and yeah, I was there for quite a few years. I had my first few amateur MMA events through that club, and it was actually that club that organized the first amateur MMA tournaments that were in London. And then eventually, when I graduated from university and got a full-time job, I actually became even more serious about my training because I didn't have much to do in the evening. So I became really focused on my training, and I decided I wanted to compete and fight. So I didn't really intend to make it a career. I didn't want to become like a full-time fighter, but I just wanted to fight and get the experience. And yeah, it just kind of built up from there. I had, quite a few amateur MMA fights and competed in Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai, and then gradually worked my way onto fighting in pro MMA. And yeah, eventually, let's see, what year was it? 2007. So I met my wife, who's from Australia, who's from Melbourne, over in London, and then we moved back to Australia. And then I was still doing the same sort of thing over here. I was working and then just fighting. I've always taken my training very seriously, but I wouldn't say I didn't take fighting seriously, but I never really intended to make it a career. I just did it as a way of testing myself and like giving myself goals to work towards for my training. So I fought, a few more times over here in Australia in both Muay Thai and in MMA, and then gradually moved more into coaching, coaching other fights. So I'd have a fight, and I'd bring some of the other guys along and get them fights on the same show as well, and then gradually moved more into full-time coaching, and then yeah, I think it was 2009, then opened up the gym and have been coaching full-time since then.
Mm. Well, I've been doing that, and it's super hard when you're fighting and your students are fighting the same night. It's
Yeah,
terrible. I actually did I think twice, and I promised myself I'll never do it again.
yeah,
Uh, because I was both times when I was doing that. I was so much into what my student is doing, and normally as you normally later in the card as as more normal fighter, and I got because I'm getting very emotionally involved when someone from my students is fighting. I pretty much when I had to fight, I was like, yeah, whatever.
yeah. You've kind of spent all of your
Yeah,
energy.
I burn out. I burn out. I cannot do that. It's very hard for me. I just burn out. So I promised myself then after doing this mistake twice, I promised myself no, I don't. My students are fighting, or someone else is dealing with them, or I am fighting.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
a good
stopped
way.
doing that. Was super hard for me. I don't know how you managed with that, but was terrible experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it didn't happen. It didn't happen too many times. Mostly, in my experience, it was mostly my training partners. So I wasn't really coaching them, but they were. Um, I would get booked in for a fight, and then I'd tell my training partners, you should fight on this event as well, and I'll have people to train with, and we'll go there together and we'll fight. So I wouldn't really be the coach of them, but I would be helping them prepare and warm up. Yes, it was more like that. But yeah,
Yeah,
I think,
that works. That works. I've been
yeah,
doing that as well, but with people we train together. But we're kind of equal, because when we start training, I was training with judo and wrestling guys, just to pick up my game. So we're kind of helping each other, but not really coaching each other. We're just pretty
yeah,
much training together. So that works. I have been doing that, and
yeah,
that's right. So I help them, they help me. But when my students fight, it's just absolutely different.
yeah. It's a different sort of world then. Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing. Like for a lot of my fights, I'd say for pretty much for nearly all of my fights, I was doing a lot of it. So I wouldn't say that I didn't have a coach, but I was training at a jiu-jitsu club, and then I was training at a Muay Thai club, and pretty much doing my own training, and then just finding my own fights. So just sending someone an email and saying, "Can I fight on your show? This is what weight I am." So I was pretty much doing all the work myself, and I didn't really have like I had coaches for jiu-jitsu for different things, but no one who really was experienced in MMA. Like so my jiu-jitsu coach hadn't fought in MMA, and my other people that I trained with didn't have much MMA experience, which no one really did have back in those days, or not many people did have back in those days. So I was kind of pretty much preparing or planning all my own training, planning how I was going to get to the show, kind of figuring out what the opponent was going to be like. So it was a lot of kind of responsibility that I was doing myself. And that's one of the things I think that that I really try to avoid with the people I train now. So I want them to just turn up and fight and not have to worry. Like I try to be very much like have everything planned. So all they have to do is you come to the gym at this time, you train this time, everything's planned. Then you go home, then you keep doing that, and then on the day of the fight, you turn up, you do this, and then you win. So that's all you have to worry about, and I take care of all the rest of it. So I think that makes a big difference.
I think that's common mentality of of people now who went through this experience, because that's true. The young people looking on how massive the sport is now cannot imagine that just 10 years ago you're everything. You're your manager, your own coach, because as you say, like myself also, I was figuring it out. I was trying to figure out how to fight this thing. Initially, there was even we even had this belief that your body can have either striking physique or either wrestling physique, so you cannot really do both.
Yeah.
And you kind of try to figure out, what kind of physique I am. So like it was funny. It was funny. Yeah. It's way more interesting now, way more professional now. But yeah, it's I understand what you're talking about, because I had the same experience. Trying to do it everything by yourself, and that burns you out, especially when you also have to fight. You arrange this, then you find someone who stay in your corner. Then after fight, you're chasing people to get your money, which I had several experiences that they went there, they're trying to trick you, so you chase them around the city. I had this with a guy fighting in Greece, so he fought with someone local, but then the promoter was trying to hide not to pay us. So I had a car, get the other fighters with the car, was chasing him from club to club.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's always going to be, especially early in the early stages of the career as well. There's always going to be things like that going on.
Well, now it's harder because like people hardly can hide themselves now.
Yeah.
But back in the days was happening all the time.
Yeah. Back in the days, I suppose it was like a lot more unregulated and. Yeah. Even it was, in most places it wasn't really even legal. So it's always going to attract the people that are looking to make some fast money.
It was just not forbidden. That's how it was back home. Like no one really take care about this stuff because no one cared, and it was just these fights happening here and there. But it was just not illegal, but figure it out.
It's close to illegal as you can be.
Yeah. Well, we had a fight like this. Went with a friend, was training together. He was heavier than me, and I have 2 fights with his corner while he was fighting in the ring.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had a few situations like that as well, where there would be 2 people fighting in the ring, and then more people fighting on the outside of the ring, cornerman and spectator.
That's what happened in this. So he's older than me. He's still fighting, by the way. So he was fighting with it was in the kind of Muslim part of the country.
Yeah.
And he was fighting with this traditional oil wrestler. You know that they make this Turkish wrestling.
Ah, okay.
Right?
Yep.
So this guy was big thing in his area, and this my friend is fighting. I was also fighting on the same night, but the guy is supposed to fight with and knock him out on a Sunday competition earlier.
Right.
So while we was driving there, the guy that I supposed to fight with, he pulled out. just hours before. And I'm driving with this guy. I say, listen, I don't care. I'm driving. Find
Yeah.
me someone to fight with. And they say, okay, like come here. We figure something out. So we're going there. And then another guy who was heavier than me. So I was fighting kickboxing 67 then, but I was accepting fights up to 72. So another guy who was 80, his opponent was called by police and went in jail the night before, so he doesn't have a point as well.
Yeah.
And I kind of know him, and I say, listen, we both need the money, right? Let's fight. And he was a wrestler, and I say, okay, but because you're heavier than me, let's do like 2 3 minute rounds. If you can submit me, you submit me, and if I'm not able to drop you, it's a draw. So
Yeah.
that's my only draw. So we kind of agree with that, and the organizer was okay, another fight, good, because
Yeah.
there was 2 fights down. So we fight, and when he took me down, he was bigger than me, a strong guy. I just like squeezed the shit out of him, until they stand us up. And
Yeah.
that was the fight. But of course, I couldn't like drop him. He was big guy, and but he couldn't submit me though.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like we just took the mic. But the main event was this fight. So my friend with the Turkish wrestler guy, and this was the dirtiest fight ever. Okay,
Really?
yeah, because this folk wrestling has a lot of dirty tricks, right? So they start fighting, and the Turkish wrestler took him down, but my friend got him in guard, right? And he doesn't know what to do, like like, and he tries to punch him, but he had good control, and he was trying there, and then he put a finger in his butt, right?
Really?
And I was, oh motherfucker, I jumped from the ring, like give him a good kick in the somewhere on the waist, I don't know like which
Yeah.
side, but I think trying. And then his corner jumper, we fight, fight breaks in the public. They
Yeah.
separate us, let them fight again. Whatever. Then this guy started getting tired, right? And they're grappling there, and this guy was saying, listen, I will give you money, give up.
Yeah.
And my friend, he's on it, like, fuck off. It's like, I'll give you money. Like, so he didn't accept. Then within the rounds, I think it was 5 minutes, five rounds fight. It was just agreement. You always agree, we fight that much rounds, and that's it, just before the fight. And then he put this oatmeal that are for women, like I don't know, like this, like
oil?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was called Bengay. It was for injuries,
Yeah.
and he snapped it in his eye.
Okay.
And then again, I jump off like, motherfucker, like, bam! And then his corner jumps again, like, again, swinging and stuff. So yeah, there are 2 fights on the corners. I think they stopped at least one more the whole fight, because there was fights between, like, Bulgarians and Turkish guys in the
Yeah.
public. It was great fight. In the end, my friend win the
Okay.
fight. And then another fight broke up, because it was the local guys was unhappy. Yeah. Fun times.
Yeah.
Fun
So
times.
yeah, we had a few experiences like that with shows around like in England as well, where there'd be fights in the ring, and then a big brawl would break out, and yeah. So I think in some ways it's good that the sport has probably moved on from that a little bit, so it's not like that so much anymore.
Yeah.
But probably still is some places though.
It is, but in the same time, it's more culture in the sport, so and also that allows more people to get involved.
Yeah.
And fighters now are better than those days. Like that's no doubt about it. They know what to do.
Yeah.
You also train with some legends in the sport.
Yeah.
I've seen pictures of yours. So can you tell me something about those experiences?
Yeah, so I think I've been lucky, I've met quite a lot of the people that I consider the best, the best fighters in the history of the sport. So I got to train with Anderson Silva. I did a seminar with him. that he got the same day that he got his UFC contract. So he had a fight in London. It was the one where he did the upward elbow and knocked out Tony Freakland. So I was actually, one of my friends was fighting on that show, and then I was, ringside for that knockout. And then I think the next day, then we did a seminar with him, which was really good actually. Like, it was a really good seminar. And then at the seminar, then he announced, I've got my UFC contract, so I'm going to be fighting in the UFC from now on. And that was I think that it was good back then because so that was, I think, 2000, probably 2005 or maybe 2006. But it seemed that like everybody who watched MMA or who turned up to the live events like Cage Rage, like it was all people who trained. Whereas I think now, obviously it's necessary for it to become a big international sport, but now I think that, just from what I can tell from reading comments on Facebook where people talk about fighters, I think most of these people have never, they've never, put on a glove in their life, let alone done any training. So I think it was a much different world back then, where the sport was just starting to get, it wasn't a freak show. Like, it wasn't you thought you were going to see someone getting killed. It was starting to get good. It was starting to get professional, but everybody who watched it and everybody who, were fans of it, they all trained, so they all kind of understood what went into it. So I think that was when you went to seminars back then, it was like people, the instructor knew, or the fighter knew, right, everybody's going to be here, they're doing some training, so they know what to expect. Whereas I would imagine these days that it's mostly, when if Anderson Silva does a seminar, it's probably people who are, just want to meet him rather than actually learn how to fight properly.
Well, two things I want to say about that. First, in the wide of the recent UFC, because of that reason that you say, back in days when people who was involved was mostly people who was training or fighting themselves, there was more respect between the fighters.
Yeah.
Because we kind of always trying to figure it out. Everyone has the same goal, so there was respect between us. So like it's, that you can win or you lose. So what in the recent UFC with Adesanya Costa gives a bad taste. Like now everyone is trying to be to do the more ridiculous things, so he creates more attention. But I don't think that makes any favor of the sport. So that. Maybe I'm getting old or something, but I think the purpose of the sport of any achievement is to to influence the world for better, and stuff like that doesn't really make any favor of anyone. Make favor of the guy who is doing it. He makes some name and makes noise around him, but I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I guess our sport is doomed to have like always one dickhead around, who give it a bad name.
Yeah.
So, and I'm kind of disappointed.
Yeah.
Admire the skills, but post-fight behavior of Adesanya. I don't know what's your turn on that, but
yeah, I mean, I'm not really. Yeah, I like Adesanya. I like watching his fights. I've always right from the beginning, but when he was just fighting here in Melbourne on whatever it was, AFC or Hex, so I've always watched them. I've always admired his skills. But I don't really even to be honest, I don't really watch. I only watch the fights. I don't watch any interviews. I don't watch any before or after. So I don't really know what they're saying. Like, I fast forward to right when the bell rings, and that's the only bit I'm interested in. So what they say to each other before or after isn't really relevant to me.
No,
but
I don't really have time to follow before and after. There's too much now, so I don't have time for that. But this I couldn't help. It was just straight after the fight. I was like, oh, what the fuck is that?
Because it gets shared around so much. But to be honest, I think that obviously Adesanya is to blame for it, but I think the UFC is to blame for it even more because they create the environment where that kind of stuff gets rewarded. So you could say, in Pride in K1, there wasn't really that kind of, they had more people turning up to their events than what the UFC has, and they didn't really they didn't really have the need for all that extra, kind of trash talking and stuff that goes into it. So I think that, to me, I think that UFC is, in some ways, it's surprising that it's lasted as long, because I sort of see it as like they're trying to make fast money. You try to hype stuff up, and you make I don't know, like what's his name? You make one guy say really controversial things that gets people interested in the fight, and then but you know that it's not a long term plan for success. So yeah.
Well, usually that finally that sooner or later fails. But and I don't know. Yeah, I think they overusing this trick to keep attention. I think I don't know how I'm really bad in business. That's fairly known. But I think if they keep the keep it like more like a competition, they will educate even the people who are not training and
Yeah,
watching it.
yeah.
So that will transfer, and that will bring more people into it.
Yeah,
That's my own
I
thought. I
mean,
don't know.
what I always think about it is that it shows, obviously Dana White knows more about it than me, because he runs his company. But the way I look at it is, if you're encouraging all this trash talking, basically what you're saying is that you don't have faith in your product. You don't believe that people will turn up and watch just fights unless you get John Jones to say this, unless you get Conor McGregor to say this. So you're encouraging them to speak in a certain way and talk in a certain way. But reading between the lines, to me, is you don't believe anybody wants to just watch these guys fight. You want people to think that they hate each other, that they're going to say this and that to each other. So that's not really, if we look at another sport, for say example, like soccer, people will watch the World Cup. They don't really need to believe that the German team and the Brazilian team hate each other. They'll just watch it because they want to watch it. So if suddenly, like before the next World Cup, then the German team started trash talking about the Brazilian team and all this kind of stuff, what that would say to me is that FIFA or UEFA, whoever, they don't believe that people want to watch football, so they have to hype it up. And that's what I see with the UFC, is like that. Obviously you have to hype it up a little bit to generate interest, but there's probably a classy way that you can do it, and then there's like a trashy Jerry Springer show way that you can do it. And the Jerry Springer show way is the quick, easy money route, but it's probably not. It's probably going to do more damage in the long term than what it does benefit.
Well, in support what you're saying, there was champions who was not trash talking, Anderson Silva, JSP,
Yeah,
who was like loved by everyone.
yeah.
And
Even Khabib as well. Khabib isn't, he's like probably one of the most dominant champions, and he's not really.
yeah, and looking at that, I don't think that people who trash talking are more profitable by themselves. You can have a positive image of the fighter, and at the same time that it's more educational for the people who are watching it, and still make a lot of them. Like I can argue that JSP and Anderson Silva in their prime, they had more following than Conor McGregor and Israel Adesanya at the moment.
Yeah,
Because with behavior like that, you have like part of people who like love it and part of people who hate it. But I think if everyone likes the fight, that's better marketing. And it's
yeah,
positive as an outcome.
yeah. Well,
Or
another thing.
maybe at least I wish to be.
Yeah. Well, this is another thing that I think about, once again, Dana White probably understands this more than me, but I would say that the people who really like, say, for example, you've got all Conor McGregor's hype and trash talk, and that gets a lot of people, watching his fights. But what I would say is probably they only watch his fights, and they probably only watch a few of them, and then they lose interest. So they don't really become long-term fans of the sport. So they see Conor McGregor saying something, and they share it on Facebook, and they get really into it, and then they maybe watch his 2 or 3 fights, and then maybe he loses one, and then they lose interest in the sport altogether. Whereas what I would say that if the people who watched George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva, they are probably become long-term fans of the sport because they start like seeing the little things about the sport. So they're probably, so as a long-term investment, you might be better off, like Conor McGregor generates a lot of interest, gets a lot of pay-per-view buys, but once he quits fighting or once he loses a few fights, then that's all gone. So it's not a long-term. Then you need another Conor McGregor, then the same thing happens. And whereas, what I would say with other sports, people tend to watch them for a long time. So people usually don't go through a phase of just watching, 6 soccer matches over the course of a year and a half and then never watch it again. Usually they watch it year after year after year after year. So that's where I think the trash talking and creating fake hype is probably good for building a little bit of interest, but then, it declines again and then you're back to square one.
Well, I think that they just limiting everything. That's what it is. Like, it's a bit is kind of interesting, to see personality of fighters, because when we don't have like so much distinguishing in styles now, it's very hard for fighter to get personality. As we talked back in the days,
Yeah.
like you can't support a fighter who has all your own style because you want the style that you actually practice to dominate. Now that's not there. It's if you don't know the fight, it's very hard to distinguish, like who's who, because now MMA being a sport by itself, and everyone figure like it's still evolving, but there's a common agreement what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
The downside is like stylistically everyone looks pretty much the same, especially if you are not into a sport and you don't really understand, some details, like the general strategy. It looks very much similar for people who are not into the sport, not trained.
Yeah.
And the downside of this one, it's hard to create personalities, which professional MMA needs. He needs to create a persona, like a character, so people can I identify with this character, identify with this character. I think that what is like pushing it to create these hypes with over expressed characters and stuff like, just for those fighters to be able to come on the whites, because there's so much other fighters, and I guess if you don't do something ridiculously stupid, so to bring the whites on you kind of like melt into the into the mass. I don't know. That's might be the reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing is, I think when you look at someone like Adesanya, I think that, his skill level and the techniques that he uses and all that, if he didn't do anything, if he pretty much refused to do anything, he would still be the biggest star, or he could still be the biggest star in the game, just because his skill level is so good and he's so impressive to watch most of his fights. So there isn't really any need for him to. So you could imagine, like, if you were like maybe a mid-level fighter and your skill level wasn't really that good, then you could see it could be worthwhile to do all that trash talking to generate more interest. But in his case, I think that's a good example of someone that he's already probably like one of the best ever strikers in the UFC, maybe the best striker in the UFC. So there's really no need for him to do all that extra stuff. So that's what I mean. Like, it's the environment of the UFC has kind of encouraged that.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. They push that. It's just an easy way for them to make money.
Yeah.
And as promoters, promoters don't really care much who's gonna be under the whites, as long as he brings people. It's just the rule of the number.
Yeah.
You said about this seminar with Anderson Silva. How you find his way of teaching?
So it was a long time ago. As I said, so let's see, I think it was 2005. So it was maybe like 16 years ago or something now. But yeah, I mean, I've been to a lot of seminars. Like, I've probably been to too many seminars, like more than I can remember, because I think it's really good to get the opportunity to learn from the best people. And so, I'd say something that I've noticed over the years is there's some people who you can tell they're really good fighters or competitors, and then there's other people who are very good coaches. Like coaches are what I would say probably more as teachers that are able to take something that they can do and break it down so that everybody can get it. Which I think is like, it's an important skill that a lot of people miss out on. But with Anderson Silva's seminar, I just remember that it was really interesting because he showed a lot of the techniques that he used in his fights. He spent a lot of time going around and speaking to moving your hands and putting everything in exactly the right spot and that sort of thing. Back then as well, I don't think there was too many people. There's probably like 20 people at the seminar because it wasn't such a big thing back then. But yeah, I remember he was a very very nice guy and very helpful. Obviously you can see that he didn't have too much experience coaching and teaching because obviously he's like a full-time fighter, but he was doing the best that he could. And also something that was confusing is like I'll never be 100% sure, but I'm almost certain that he was speaking English all the way through the seminar as well and explaining everything in English. And then when I later saw interviews and saw the documentary, whatever it is, Like Water, he was saying that he didn't speak English. So I don't know if that was just part of if that was like a deliberate thing so that he didn't have to do so many interviews. But yeah. I'll never be sure.
I was on seminar with him like I don't know, like 2 years ago or something. No, actually, when he fought with I don't know if he fought. It was maybe Adesanya.
Yeah, maybe when he fought Adesanya over here.
Yeah, they brought him here, and I was on seminar, but I was kind of, my impression was he's too good himself to teach.
Yeah.
What I say, like, obviously what he's telling, explaining is good, and he was explaining the moves that he does. But from me, like, from the perspective of me being coaching already like quite a few years, he's not good in explaining to put it in a way that can explain to people. I can understand, but in the same time was no structure, so you can pull good, so you can pick stuff from here and there, but there was no structure first of all, which for me, like now when I go on seminar, that's one of the things I really appreciate. I want to see structure because I know some moves, right? I'm not impressed by this move and that moves, but I like to see structure into it, the thing behind. And there's something else, like I think he has too much natural gift, so like his feeling of distance and timing is so good that he doesn't really have understanding of how he does exactly that. He's just doing it. It's just like like it's like you cannot ask a bird to teach you to fly because it just flies. So it's I have this impression. Then on the other end, you kind of mentioned that. I think also that's completely non-commercial thinking, right? I think white belts shouldn't go on seminar because that's terrible, right? There was question and answers, and you can barely ask something that makes sense because all the white belts asking like stupid questions, like shut up, like you have chance to learn from this guy. Just don't ask him like dumbass fan questions. That's one thing that I was, but I understand the organizers need to pay back. I don't know how much they paid for this time. It's probably not cheap. So they need the people. But
contacted us about hosting a seminar with him, and it was like it was like $10,000 or something like that. It was a huge amount of money, and basically you wouldn't be able to fit that many people into the gym. So
charge that much.
Yeah, but nah, it is true what you said though, and something that I've found a lot is And I think it's, because obviously once I started coaching full time, I wanted to get as good at it as I could, and research the best methods. So I've like researched a lot of coaching styles from other sports and things like that. And one of the things that most people sort of agree on is that the people who are the best, or like the most talented athletes, or the best fighters in our case, usually aren't really going to be the best coaches, because just for one thing, it probably came naturally, even though they don't think it came naturally to them, but it probably did. Things can come naturally to them, so they can't really understand, if there's a new white belt that doesn't understand how to do this, they can't understand why they don't, why they're not getting it. So and it's sort of true what you said as well. Like it is probably a waste of time for a lot of white belts to turn up at seminars, because you don't really, if you don't really even know the basics of how to hold your hand up while you punch, it's probably going to be a waste of time learning what Anderson Silva is going to teach you. But on the other hand, maybe you go to a seminar and then you're in the early days of your training, and it gives you inspiration to want to keep going, or it gives you like a sort of a bit of motivation to improve yourself. So there could be two sides to it.
Well, depends where you are. I think from one side is good to attend seminar even if you're newbie, so you can see stuff, and even you can pull one or two stuff that will stay for a while. That's good. But from other point of view, it's always involvement of the white belts into a seminar kind of downgrades the level of the seminar, because as if you're giving seminar, you kind of want to accommodate the group that you have, the public that you have. So it's kind of like hard, if you go to to stuff that are more interesting for the more advanced ones, you kind of if the bigger group of the attendees on the seminar are kind of newbies, and they're just like watch, like what the hell, it's kind of hard. I've seen that on a seminar, which was very interesting, by the way, very good seminar with Imanari. Brisbane. But if you never done leg walks, and like you're going to Imanari row, it's just like what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
But by the way, that's why I started appreciating structure, because he kind of make introduction into Imanari row. So even the guys who never did kind of like get close to what he's doing.
Well, actually, he did the same at our gym just at the same time as well, and I think he followed the same kind of structure. And
it was really good. I appreciate that, because that's a clever way to do a seminar. He put some basics so it can make sense, and then he goes into the interesting stuff. I was really happy about this seminar. Was really good. I love it. And the fun part was, especially with him, he was rolling with everyone, and I rolled with him. That was super fun. It was very I love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. I mean, so say something like that. I would imagine that one idea could be so I'd say that the problem with maybe some top fighters like Anderson's, probably just so much stuff. So probably what would make it more useful would be, you're going to do a seminar with Anderson Silva, but he's going to show you 10 elbow combinations from clinch, and that's all you're going to do. You're not going to do any, and then it would be easier to get into that kind of useful detail. Whereas if it's just, show 1,000 things, and which I think that's what happens at a lot of seminars. There's probably too much variety of techniques, but not really enough depth on any one of them. So it's good experience, but not really no long-term benefit.
Well, I think a seminar should have a subject.
Yeah.
So if it just random, and then I think it doesn't have much value for more advanced people or coaches.
Yeah.
It's more like a fan thing. I enjoy it, like meet Anderson Silva, like take picture of him, but seminar wise was not that interesting for me from coaching. Of course, it was fun experience, but
well, I mean, I think it goes back to what you're saying about the what we were saying about the difference between fighter and coaching as well. And one of the things that I always try to remember, which like I learned from trying to learn about coaching, is that if, for example, you're really good at a technique like a spinning back kick, and you've got 10 people in the class, 10 people in your class, and then at the end of the class, if they can't do a spinning back kick properly, or at least they don't know how to do it, or they haven't improved at it, then you failed as it doesn't really matter how good you were at it. Your job during that time isn't to impress people with your spinning back kick, and it isn't to knock anybody out with a spinning back kick. It's to teach those 10 people how to do it. And if you can't do that, then you failed in your job for that 1 hour. And then maybe the hour after that, then you have to go fight someone in the street and knock them out with a spinning back kick. And then you're good at that. But that's what I always try to remember with coaching. It's like you can come in and you can impress people with techniques, but that's not the same as actually like giving them the knowledge and improving their game. So there's a lot of there's certain skills that go in to be able to do the technique, and then there's a whole bunch of other skills that go into being able to teach someone else how to do the technique. And usually people neglect the other skills.
Well, it's another skill. I was just curious if Anderson Silva was like that just because he was after a fight, or just that's his style of coaching. And because you say you met him before, I was just curious. That's just like personal curiosity. Speaking about coaching, you do a lot of analysis, which I personally enjoy, of classic fighters.
Yeah, okay.
And I know that you involve that in your own coaching. Can you tell me more about that? That's curious.
About like so breaking down fighters, and then using their techniques and their styles for my own teaching, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because I remember back in the days when we was like kind of exchanging coaching styles. I remember one of your posts in the Australian coaching group was so your class structure was something like that. You had like for example, striking for Anderson Silva, or like takedown from GSP, stuff like that, which I found it curious. So like that's what I want to talk to you about that a bit.
Yeah, so I think it's something that I've always been doing it. What's interesting is one of the things that it's, even though it's sort of obvious, but one of the things that really made me think about this as a good way to train people is that one of my MMA fights back in England, I was in the same changing room as Conor McGregor's coach, as John Kavanagh, and he was actually warming up the other guy. I think it might be Owen Roddy. So Owen Roddy was fighting on the same show, who I think is Conor McGregor's striking coach now. And then I was like doing my own warm up, I was kind of having a look to see what they're doing, and John Kavanagh was like, I think he was calling out like Chuck Liddell, and he was just calling out the name of the fighters, and then they would do a certain combination on the pads, and then that made me think, that's a good idea, maybe when I get, so I think actually his guy lost his fight, and then I won my fight, but then when I went back to my gym, that was when I was training at the Carlson Gracie gym in London, then I thought, I'm going to start doing that, so I'm going to have a look at, because even if it's not really the best idea, at least it's useful because it's an easy way to get people to remember combinations. And then so I started doing that, started going, right, let's do the GSP combination. There's going to be a Superman punch, the other combination is going to be this or that. And I think people can learn it quicker as well because they've got a visual. So if you say combination A, and that's a jab, cross, hook, it's like too hard to remember, but you can remember visual things quicker. So you can remember seeing Chuck Liddell knock a guy out with this combination, and it comes back to you faster. And then, I think basically over the time, I just sort of expanded it into to doing other things. So we've got like combinations that are based on fighters, but then like entire strategies that are based on fighters, or like sequences of combinations. And yeah, I think I suppose one of the reasons for it is that with MMA, there's just so much to learn. So if you learned if someone gave you, right, this is the boxing coach's manual, and then this is the Muay Thai coach's manual, and then this is all of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques, and then this is all of the wrestling syllabus level 1 to 4. There's just so much stuff you're never really gonna remember it all. But if you can break it down into segments, that's gonna speed up how quickly you can improve, and also like speeds up your decision making as well.
Well, I use something like that. So on a certain level, of course, like when the guys start to do, when they pass the basic course, let's say, I have a mental exercise when I ask them, it's actually a sports science exercise. It's called morphing.
Yeah.
So you imagine your favorite fighter. Funny enough, you see people with certain body type, they always choose certain fighter.
Yeah.
So people people because they like them. But as a sport exercise that help young people, or like people who are new in the sport, to develop their style. So for example, like if you practice this, and so the sports psychologists say if you practice something for 2 weeks, it becomes a habit. So if you practice for 2 weeks, let's say you try to morph into JSP. If you practice for 2 weeks, then you kind of start to picking strategies, and you mix it up with JSP, which helps to a student to create his own style.
Yeah.
Of course, like with the time he's gonna abandon that, and he'll start like getting carried away with these moves or this move. He'll create his own style. I found that this really helpful as a coaching tool to help students, especially that's pretty much like, I would say, like blue belt level students. To I try to give it on that level so guys can actually start imitating someone until they develop their own way of mixing stuff up. I find this very useful, and it works for me. And the other thing is, you say you breaking it down and put it together. Can you explain this process a bit? That's also interesting.
Like breaking down the combination.
Yeah, so you breaking down like certain moves or strategies for a fighter, and how you funnel this into let's say structuring a class or a training process.
Okay, right. So yeah. So I'd say like one of the reasons that I also thought that doing it like this was a good idea is just basically because like as I said, when I really first started doing MMA training, or there wasn't really that much. There hadn't been too many MMA fights or too many events, so research and find out what's the best way to train or what's the best way to fight. But it was very difficult back then because there isn't as much evidence to look at. Whereas now, it's like 30 years later, there's a lot of fights you can go back and look at. You can sort of see that there's certain strategies or certain types of fighter that are more dominant, and there's other ones that are say for example, like as a good example, let's look at this. So even though we both agreed that the MNRE roll seminar was really good, but how many times has that worked in a real fight? Hasn't worked very many times. So if I get all my students to spend, let's spend like the first 6 months working on the MNRE roll, obviously they'll be good at it, but they're probably not gonna make it to much higher level in MMA. But instead, you can let's look at what GSP does, let's look at what John Jones does, what Anderson Silva does, like what they do, and not all the fancy stuff, because obviously they can just do the fancy stuff because they're elite athletes. But these are the people that we should be focusing on and figure out what do they do, and we try to fix that, trying to bring that into our style of training. And yeah, like how I actually, structure our training or classes. I've gone through a few different phases, and obviously, like this year, we've had a lot of time off, so I've had a lot of time to reorganize things. But the main sort of thing is we divide it into, like, we'll do maybe a week or two of specific MMA striking, then striking into takedowns. So when it's striking into takedowns, we'll look at the fighters like GSP, Randy Couture, guys like that. They're and Fedor as well. They're the very best at that kind of range. Then getting then actual takedowns that are specific for MMA. So I think that's another big problem is that people go into even I've seen this with like top level fighters where they go too much into the specific styles. So for example, you'll have a really good MMA fighter, and then for their boxing training, they'll probably train with people who are too specific to boxing and aren't really taking into account all the other things that are happening.
I think the problem with that is when you train with the basic styles, that creates in the fight. You can even see in UFC that it creates like modes,
Yeah.
right? So you have the fighter into striking mode, then they looking for a call, take him down. He completely stops striking.
Yeah.
Then just start resting. Then they get on the ground and they say oh, like, go for submission, and he completely forgets that he can ground and pound. So like that happens with the fighters that train in these modes. So he has a striking coach, a wrestling coach, grappling coach.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of the sport is to put this as a point, as you say, like this like Andy Couture, Milling, how they strike into takedown and they throw into submission or position for being for ground and pound. I think that's the mastery of MMA.
Yeah. And I think that's what, like, if you just go, obviously, I mean, it'll help a little bit, but if you're an MMA fighter and you go and train with a pure boxing coach or a pure wrestling coach or a pure jiu-jitsu coach, they think that they understand the other styles, but they probably don't really understand. They probably don't really even understand the rules of the other styles. So it's always going to be, it's always going to cause problems. So it's actually interesting. Like one of the things that I did that helped a lot with my coaching is I got like mentoring from a guy who's like a sports coach. He's actually in the Gold Coast as well, so he's probably quite nearby you. A guy called Wayne Goldsmith, who's like he's worked with a lot of top sports teams, and I think his main area of expertise actually was like in triathlon coaching, which to me is like really relevant because MMA is a little bit like a triathlon because you've got grappling, striking, and wrestling. And then I was just getting a lot of ideas from him about like, if you want to be a top triathlete, do you go do your swimming one day and then you go to the running coach and then he tells you something else that you should be doing, and then you go to your cycling coach and he tells you something else, and just how they manage that differently. But
I think it helps, but only after you have MMA base.
Yeah.
And that creates a good filter. So like I think it's good to use these specialist coaches. But after your athlete has a MMA base, he thinks into MMA, so he say, oh, I can take this one, or like that's not useful for my game. And I kind of, I find it, I like to work always with MMA perspective. That's my main goal anyway. Like, and that helps me, to stay on line, not to be carried away. Yeah, I can go in the seminar in Monero, but I would not really teach it. I have fun myself. I gave this as an example how a complex technique can be presented.
Can be broken down,
broken down, so it can be fun for the beginners and also for the advanced. As a seminar was very well structured, I won't really use Monero, to be honest.
Yeah.
But in the same time, if you have like a good structure, that creates a filter that you can actually use, to pick stuff from the specialist stuff. While the opposite, when you're trying to do what we actually was doing like 10 years ago, to pick this, to pick that, and then just kind of figure out together, that puts you back in the time, which I don't think you can keep you too long competitive, and you can see that as we said, despite like everyone fights the same because people figure out they train MMA. The new
Yeah,
fighters they train MMA. Unfortunately, the old fighters that we work, they have character and they specialize in one area. One by one they start falling out. They cannot deal with this guy for complete. They can strike us, they can wrestle us, they can submit.
yeah. Yeah, well, like another thing that's sort of related to that as well is I would say that for something like jiu-jitsu, when I first started doing jiu-jitsu, which was like, 2000, 2001, and then for the, probably quite a few years after that, there wasn't really the techniques that you learned in a jiu-jitsu class or even the techniques that you would learn or that you would use in a sports jiu-jitsu tournament but were just the same techniques that you could use in an MMA fight. So obviously it's a little bit different because you can grab the gi. But over the years then, there's just been a lot more sports specific stuff that, it didn't really exist back then. So now you could, in theory, you could be doing jiu-jitsu for 3 or 4 years and not really learn anything that would techniques that would make you really good and really successful in a sports jiu-jitsu environment, but you probably wouldn't be able to use any of it in an MMA fight. Whereas when I first started, basically the only techniques that existed in jiu-jitsu were ones that you could use in sports jiu-jitsu or you could also use in MMA. So and I think that's probably what happens with all martial arts, like, Taekwondo or whatever. It probably starts off where it's real fighting, then the sport side of it becomes more and more popular, and then people have to do you want your club to win medals, so we better start training like this, and that's where it goes in a different direction.
Yeah, the thing is, you're right. The thing is, the sports kind of evolve by themselves. So
Yeah,
now the things that you do to win a BJ competition will fail in MMA.
yeah,
But I find this kind of relieving because I have like a limit to what I can concentrate on.
yeah,
So I'm happy that I don't need to deal with stuff like too much theory regard. As long as you have basic understanding how to deal with it and how to fight it, that's all you need, in order, to practice your MMA stuff in grappling competition.
yeah,
But that kind of, like limits the target of moves and positions that I have to work over, because then it becomes too big universe for me. I like
yeah.
to
Too
be able
much.
to concentrate on what I'm working on.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it's crazy. I cannot imagine, like if 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 you want to. It's just different sports now. It's different
yeah,
sports. Like you have to choose. You want to be good in jiu-jitsu, yeah, then go ahead and like explore the universe of the advanced guards and positions and rubber guard and whatever style you want. But if you want to develop in MMA, then you have to choose ASA because MMA is complex enough. You
yeah.
cannot go too crazy into one direction. It's
No,
same like if you have certain striking that works, but you cannot do like too much fancy spinning stuff in MMA with striking as well. It just the rules don't allow it, and you have other skills to learn as well.
yeah, that's it. Unless you're at a much higher level than your opponent. But if you're you should be aiming to fight people that are the same level. So you have to focus on the high percentage techniques.
No, I'm not against having fun and like spicing up your technique from time to time, but one thing is to spice them up. One thing is what you're actually working over. It's just
Yeah,
different aspects.
yeah, that's it.
You have great coaching book. I don't know if people who train for it. I wish they do. I think mostly coaches for it because that's what coaches do. They try to learn from each other.
Yeah,
Uh, can you tell me more about that? So just some of the recent articles that I wrote is the Fedor breakdown, and you have other good articles. I try to share with my students. I don't know how much they read and
yeah,
stuff that they share. Like planning your fight career, that was a good article as well.
yeah. So I've been writing like stuff like that. I think probably ever since I first started coaching, and then sometimes I've gone through phases of, writing a lot of different articles, and then I'll go, there'll be a whole year that I won't get around to doing it at all. But then obviously this year I've had a lot more free time, so I've had a lot of time to do it. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, I actually write a lot of stuff on my gym's Facebook group, and then think, oh, that's pretty good. Maybe I'll share that onto the blog as well to see. And so, sometimes I'm surprised that so many people find it interesting because it's just the same stuff I tell my students all the time, and they don't really pay any attention to it. They just kind of look
Oh,
into the distance. But
tell
then
me
when I
about it.
share it, yeah, then other people say, oh, that was really good, that was useful, and they share it with other people. So it's always surprising, when that happens. But yeah, it's, I think. As I said, ever since I started coaching, full-time coaching, I've been, always trying to learn more and improve the way that I coach, and try to get better results. And we've been doing pretty good. Like at the beginning, we were having people winning local fights, and then we got people up to win shows, and we got people competing on international events every now and again. And I've always been trying to, once we get to the next level, then we'll keep improving from there and keep going and keep going. And so, yeah, most of the stuff that I write on my blog is just stuff that I've learned along the way, and stuff that I think I think a lot of it is based on, these are mistakes that I see other fighters, maybe sometimes coaches, or maybe sometimes like even promoters or people organizing the sport. In my experience, these are the things that I see that are a little bit wrong, and this is what they should focus on fixing. And then whether anybody chooses to focus on fixing them or not, that's a different story. But that's all I can do.
Well, I myself, I'm engineer, right? So I like to write stuff so I can see them and correct them. So I'm
Yeah,
doing this myself. I don't know if someone is reading. I hope that my students read what I'm trying to tell them. But I'm mostly writing it for myself, so I can see it and say, okay, that's right, and I can
yeah,
put it. And I like to systemize things, like
yeah,
when they're reading, you can move blocks.
yeah,
When you try to rely only on memory, it just too how to say, your memory, your mind is just too depending from many other stuff, your emotions, like what happens during the day. I like to have the stuff like in
yeah,
front of me.
yeah.
I
Well,
like to put stuff
yeah.
down.
So that's the same with me as well. Like that's a big part. Like with the blog articles and all that. A big part of that is like, from what my research into coaching, you have to have a coaching philosophy. So you have the things you believe in, or like reasons for why you're going to do things. And if you don't have that, then you can just be, you don't really know what you're doing. One day you're doing taekwondo, the next day you're doing, like, I don't know, whatever. So you need to have a philosophy that makes you decide why you're going to do each thing. So yeah, it's mostly just for me to, this is what I think. I'm going to write it down and I'm going to stick with it. But yeah, I'm the same with like the organization sort of side of things as well, where I want, with everything that we do, with, from planning the classes down to train people for fights, I try to be very organized. I have everything written out down to, just recently, down to exactly what the cornermen are going to do on the night of the fight. So we've got like a thing that says, this is what the first cornerman does. He goes, gets the water. This one gets the ice. He does this between the rounds. This is the exact warm up we do, because I think that, like fighting and competition is very chaotic. So you need to try to make it, if you can make it more structured, then that gives you a big advantage. And that's something that I don't really feel like I had when I was fighting. It was all a bit, it was just randomly, getting a train, turning up at a venue, fighting with someone who I didn't know who it was going to be, and then getting back home again. So doing this kind of stuff, having everything planned and everything, like really precise, as if it's like a military operation. I think that gives you a big it gives my fighters a big advantage when it comes to fighting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't need to apply this recently because here in Australia my team is fairly small. I was doing this back home where the team is quite bigger, and when you go on a tournament you get crazy. I was appointing tasks, and that really gives kind of structure into the chaos.
Yeah.
So, and especially when emotions get high, people start fighting, winning, losing, teammates, and it's very important to have people. Okay, this guy is responsible for that. That guy is looking for the order of the fights, informing me. This guy is doing hand drops or whatever. It's very important to have this structure.
Yeah.
Because when you're the main coach and on a big tournament or like a big fight, and you have like a couple of people, it's really crazy. No one knows what's going on, and it's very stressful for the fighters because.
Yeah.
The emotional load is big already, and when they have to go and someone pick them up, pick and went somewhere towards someone else, and they're like, where's my mouth guard? It just it just ruins the whole setup, whole mindset just before. And I had my experience there. That was on a kickboxing finals. Was funny, my coaches went to a coffee, and I was called for my final. So I put my goals and didn't have a mouth guard.
Oh, okay.
And not to get disqualified, I went in the ring, and then the referee is checking me, and I told him I don't have mouth guard. And he's like, "Where's your mouth guard?" My coach, "Where your coach?" So I was like, "I don't know."
Yeah.
I just because I didn't want to tell, and then I saw them running into. Just say, okay, here they're coming.
Yeah.
But it's really messy if you have to go through that. It just
and I think it's like that's in my experience, that's what I see. It's pretty common in the fight world as well, where a lot of teams are disorganized, fighters are disorganized. No one really know. Like sometimes it works, but it's probably just by chance that it works. So I think the more that you can reduce all that uncertainty by having proper planning and proper organization, I think that's probably one of the most underrated things about coaching and training people.
Well, I always what I pick from engineering is engineers pretty much are trying to put order in a chaotic world, and but in a chaos, any structure, even if it's not perfect, it's never perfect. There's always something that happens that is like random. But when you have structure, to take it, and then who is doing what, and you can relocate this task for him, it helps a lot. That's pretty much what even in military use for people who are on the ground and stuff. It's always chaotic. You never know what's happening. But when you have the structure built, that okay, this person is responsible for that part of it, this person is responsible for that part of it, you can take it. It's just chaotic, and you have a problem, and then suddenly four of your guys went to deal with that, but then for the stuff that you think they covered, now they're off, they're trying to deal with something else, all of them. It just leaves you too much openings. So I'm all for that. That's really important point that you mentioned. It's really nice. We meet each other because of the amateur MMA here in Australia.
Yeah.
And you have a recent article about that. So what's the problem with the amateur MMA in Australia? From your perspective.
So I think in the article, so I wouldn't really say that it's specifically to Australia. This is just something that I've noticed. Pretty much all over in my experience. But I would say that there probably is some places where they don't, like from what I understand, like Eastern Europe sort of places, they've got amateur MMA pretty well organized and sorted out. But some of the things I said in the article is, one big problem I would say, which is that there, in a lot of ways, there isn't really any need for amateur MMA, because if anybody feels like it, they can just go straight into pro MMA. So that's always going to be a problem unless there's some way of avoiding that. There's no real reason, or there's no way to or in a lot of cases, it's hard to convince a fighter that you need to do amateur MMA first before you go to pro MMA. So that, to me, that's always going to be a problem, because it makes it difficult to build up, to make amateur MMA, like to build up the sport, but also it makes it difficult for pro MMA to get better as well. So as an example, like, say for another sport like tennis or football, you probably couldn't just, no matter how much you want it, how much you write about it on Facebook, you can't just go and play in the Premier League just because you really want to. You have to go through the process of playing as an amateur, playing at local teams, building your way up. But with pro MMA, anybody can basically just train for a little while and then jump in and have a pro MMA fight. So I would say that, maybe that's good. I don't know. Maybe it's not good. But the reality is there's not really an incentive for people to have amateur fights when you can just turn pro whenever you feel like it anyway. And then, sort of following on from that, because of that, it's going to be very hard to convince people to have, so in my case, like with all of my fighters who I train, I tell them you have to have amateur fights first. You can't just go and have a pro MMA fight. You have amateur fights, get the experience, try out your skills against like a variety of different opponents, and then you can turn and become a professional. And then when you're a professional, then you build up from there. Then you get into a big show like UFC or ONE FC, and then that's the career pathway. But it's very hard. So if you've got a coach who doesn't really understand that pathway, and they just got a fighter who's smashing everybody in the gym, and they just look around and go, there's a pro MMA. I'll put my fighter on there and see how he does. And something that I try to tell people a lot is it really, you only get one chance to be a fighter. So as a coach, you get a lot of chances, because next year there's going to be another 18-year-old that walks in off the street that wants to be a fighter, so you get to train him, and then the next year after that you get to train someone else. But everybody only gets one chance. You get one chance to have an amateur fight career, then you go into a pro fight career, and then once you get to if you get to the UFC and you're not good enough, you'll lose your fights, you'll get cut, and then you probably won't get a chance to do it again. So you've basically only got one shot to do it. So do it properly, and then you're probably going to be more successful.
But isn't that a good argument to have an amateur career?
Yeah,
because that's where you get good.
Yeah, it is, but I think that argument doesn't get through to a lot of people.
Well, that job of coaches, I think,
Yeah.
coaches have to explain it.
Yeah, but I mean, the other problem is, like, obviously, it would be good if so just for an example, it's probably a bit too authoritarian, but you could say that nobody in Australia is allowed to have a pro MMA fight until you've got 10 amateur fights with a winning record, or you've got 10 amateur fights and you've won at least 8 of them. So you could bring in something like that, but I think that would probably cause a lot of problems. But I would say that, like, in an ideal world, if you're thinking of what's going to be better for the sport long term, what's going to be better for the fighters, what's going to be better for the coaches, something like that would probably be the way to go. Whereas at the minute, it's a little bit of if anybody feels like it, if your uncle feels like it, he can just get a pair of gloves, jump in, have a pro MMA fight, get knocked out, and then.
Well, as Eastern European are naturally, oppose regulations. We don't like stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think that regulates naturally itself. That is the beauty of the fighting world. It's regulating itself. And I'll tell you my perspective of that. I think slowly that will become a standard without any regulation, just because I think people who have amateur career, they're just better fighters.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't exclude the case someone to be super talented, to jump from other sport, and that's always been the case. And I have no problem with people like that to jump straight amateurs if they have already like huge experience in some of the other basic sports,
Yeah,
which happens all the time. Like good kickboxer, like good wrestler, like practice a bit, good jiu-jitsu guy, gives a bit of 1 or 2 year work on his downside and goes and competes in MMA. That's fine. That's fine, because they always let's say athletes and they have their game, and if they want to go straight to pro, I don't have problem with that.
yeah,
But I think that as we thought, as sports evolves and MMA evolves as of a different sport by itself, I think with the time, like people who give themselves time, to go through amateur career, to learn how actually to play this sport, to do their mistakes as amateurs, they slowly will push out the guys who come jumping from other sport.
yeah,
Because with the time, as we commented already, people figure out how to play this as a sport, and that exposes the weaknesses of the specialist styles. And just with the time, I think that naturally this is going to be pushed just by the fighters. Successful
yeah.
fighters will be
Well,
the
well,
ones who actually commit to progress that let them evolve.
yeah. Well, I'd say that one of the problems, like with MMA or with all sort of professional fighting sports, compared to other sports, though, is that there's always going to be you always need someone to turn up and lose as well. So if you're the promoter and you've booked the venue and you've got like the fight card all planned out, booked out. You've got everybody's flights and hotels and everything paid for. And then, 2 weeks before you find out that one of the fighters has got injured and you just need a last minute guy to step in and get knocked out. So there's always that's the sort of thing that doesn't really happen with other sports like soccer and AFL, but that's always going to be the case for fighting sports. So that's so then when that happens, chances are you're not really going to find if someone is taking their fight career seriously and they're having their amateur fights and they're going through the process, chances are they're not going to be willing to jump in and take a short notice fight against someone who might knock them out because they want to have the perfect planning. So there's always going to be that market for the guy that doesn't really want to follow the best plan.
Yeah, but that's fine.
Yeah,
That's fine. You pay for your mistakes.
yeah,
So you won't see guys like that, much of guys like that reaching the highest level of the sport, like big promotion like UFC and YFC.
yeah, yeah,
Say you can make a bit of quick bucks and stuff, but you don't really progress. So and I the problem with our sports is like they doesn't really matter if you're not the best.
yeah,
So it's you just have to pay your time. If you're impatient, it's you pay for it. Like it's there is a reason why this positive word also is so repeated in jiu-jitsu also, but it means patience
yeah,
because that's one of the main keys, to get better in the fighting sport. You have to be patient. You have to take your path, and if you rush through it without being, like there's exceptions, exceptions. There are people who are like super talented. They're just exceptions. But
yeah.
even if in that case, if you're a bit patient, that will pay back.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose, I think one of the other articles that you mentioned as well, that I said about like planning the fight career, I'd say that for a lot of people, you don't really have to be, I suppose when you're 18 or you're 20, 10 years seems like a long time, but basically you probably have to put in 10 years. If you try to rush it, you're probably not going to get anywhere. And if you look at all of the success, so even like say Adesanya, so he was fighting on smaller shows 10 years ago or over 10 years ago, and you just have to go through the process.
And
And
also huge kickboxing experience, has a
yeah,
lot of amateur fights as a kickboxer as well.
yeah. So that's the thing. It's like you have to be patient, but 10 years isn't really, if you're not spending your 10 years building up your fight career or whatever, what else are you going to be doing? You're probably just hanging around with your friends, watching TV or doing nothing. So you've basically got 10 years. If you're not a UFC champion or you're not a whatever champion after 10 years, then you should probably have another career to fall back on rather than keep going for another 10 or 20 years because you're probably just going to go downhill after that.
Well, the thing is, in any skill, I think that's also from sport psychology. In any skill that you're trying to master, 10 years is the time that you master any skill.
Yeah, yeah,
It doesn't matter it's a craft or an art or a sport. You need 10 years to master it.
yeah,
And I think I don't know if that's by coincidence or by design. That's why you get your black belt in about 10 years time in jiu-jitsu at least.
yeah,
I think since jiu-jitsu is modern enough as a style of the system, I think this knowledge is involved into this 10-year, at least the official structure of the belt system, 10 years to black belt. Because to master a skill and knowledge and art, which is always evolving as every art, you need 10 years. Because I think you pass through stages. So about your second year, you kind of start to understand the game. Then you start, to create your own game, and then you progress slowly until the 10th year that you can call yourself a master of what you practice.
yeah,
So I think, and also I personally believe every person who dedicates 10 years, I mean, with a good coach, good system, and he he follows everything theoretically, if he doesn't get injured and stuff, he will be on UFC level in 10 years training. The question is after these 10 years if you want to follow this career or he just want to have something, and that's totally their choice.
yeah,
But I think if you're doing everything right, if you don't get injured meanwhile, which is always a problem involved in our sport, and you have systematic approach for 10 years, you can create a UFC level game,
yeah, definitely.
and you should be able to create this from everyone. But by theory, that you should be able to do this from everyone. Then the question is if this guy will stay 10 years in the sport and we will follow you, or we could just decide to do something else, which often happens.
Yeah,
And it's pissing you off, you was working and you just start being good, and then he's like, yeah,
yeah,
that's enough. I'm happy. I'm out.
yeah. Well, I think it's sort of understandable as well because 10 years it's a lot of time, but I think that you can see that if people are on the right the system and they do what that they should be doing, that you can see where they can get to, but not everybody wants to, because when someone starts training, they don't really understand what their goals are. Maybe their goals only become clear like a few years in, so they might get closer to that goal and realize that's not really for me. I don't really want to do this anymore. I want to do something else. So I think it does happen a lot.
Yeah, but you cannot judge about that because it's a hard pathway. It's
Yeah,
a hard sport, so it's. And wife gets in, and people, get carried away with something else, or something important happened in their life from their perspective. You
yeah,
cannot judge about that. I'm always tolerant about that. So even if I was working hard with someone, if you choose different path,
yeah, yeah.
it is own way.
That's the same
It's
same
very
with
hard
me as
sport.
well. Yeah, like I mean, I never really want to coach someone or corner someone, prepare someone for fights unless I'm sure that they actually want to fight themselves. So I don't want someone having a fight and thinking that they're doing me a favor by getting in there and fighting because I've already had a lot of fights. I don't really need anybody else to go in and fight on my behalf. So for me, the only people that I really want to train to fight are the people that I'm sure are like 110% committed to it. because if they're not, they probably aren't really gonna train the way that I want them to train anyway. So it would be better off wasting their own time.
Oh yeah, and as a coach, it's your responsibility to save them that suffering, to do
Yeah,
something they don't
yeah,
want. And also, it's not fun to work, with people like that. And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly
yeah,
fine. I'm perfectly fine with people who train for fun.
yeah,
They should
yeah,
be people like that, and they're very very valuable because the thing with people who train for fun, they're free from restrictions. So sometimes they experiment more. They come to quite a good ideas. I had people that was just training for fun, but we actually pick ideas from them because they just free to experiment. While like
yeah,
companies, they very often quite focused
yeah,
and
definitely.
they don't really gonna go off the one for something. But while the people who are training for fun, they're free to research and sometimes they really like put things into the system. It just
Yeah.
I really appreciate them. Sometimes they're really really helpful. Oh, we had a good talk, man. We talked like
Yeah,
almost
yeah,
two
no,
hours.
that was good. Some good, yeah, some good interesting topics.
How people can follow you, your team on social media, yourself, your blog?
Yeah, so you can see some of my articles if you look up Dennis Kelly MMA coaching. It's got like the blog with all my articles there and some videos, and you can also check out my gym, which is Australian Combat Sports Academy. So just search for that on Google or on Facebook. Um, and yeah, then hopefully it won't be too long until we're allowed to open up again and get back to training.
Yeah, hopefully, man. Hopefully, everything will be normal soon, and we can be back training
Get
and
on with
competing.
life. Yeah.
What classes you have in your academy at the moment?
Which what? Sorry.
What kind of classes you had in your academy before you actually was closed or forced to close?
Before we were closed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So mostly we focus on we're pretty much half Muay Thai and then half Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Um, so those are our two biggest classes. We also got kids, like some kids classes, teens classes. We also do a few other things like we've got Krav Maga, which myself and Phil, who owns the gym with me, so we both used to teach it, but now we've handed that on to some of our other assistant instructors. And then we do like the MMA program. I sort of do that a little bit separately. So it's basically just for the people that either want to compete or they want to compete or they want to fight, or we've got some people that have been training in jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai for a long time and they don't really want to compete so much, but they just like to jump in and help out the other guys. So yeah, with our system, we try to make it that we've got like a set timetable. So fighters have to train in I think it's like 3 no-gi classes a week, plus a certain amount of striking Muay Thai classes, plus the MMA classes, and it's been working pretty well so far.
Sweet. You have to put some Sambo in. We actually just before the lockdown, we started establishing a Sambo federation in
Okay.
Australia
Yeah,
together with FIRS. So like it will be fun to have more people involved. It's a fun rules to play with. I hardly imagine this will become like as basic sport as back in Russia or Eastern Europe, but it's fun rules to play, and I think it has a lot of benefits for just as additional rule set that you can actually like practice your skills.
yeah. So
Uh,
we actually had Andrew Marshanov that ran the course for the IMAF. When we first, I think it was when we first opened the gym, a lot of years ago, he came down and ran a Sambo
yeah,
seminar.
he was actually working similar job for FIRS, which is the World Sambo
Yeah,
Federation,
yeah.
like development of the sport. So I know him. I know him from there. By the way, I met him first time in Mexico. I was working with the Mexican national team.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I met him actually there, and then when he came here, I saw him again, and He's really good in that. He
Yeah,
did
yeah, he's
great
good.
stuff for the development of Sambo in the world. And combat Sambo is really fun. I don't know, like we have to train some referees because the rules are a bit awkward,
Yeah, hard to follow because you can
and
headbutt and everything
yeah,
in
you
there.
can
Yeah,
headbutt and stuff like that. I don't know if we have troubles with that here in Australia, especially in New South Wales. So nowadays, like some state that has this combo sports board that you have to deal with them.
yeah,
It's kind
yeah.
of pain in the ass. I remember when we was organizing the
Loopholes.
tournament in New South Wales. So
Yeah,
yeah, we see how we go, but bit by bit, yeah. But it's fun. It's fun. I think it's going to be just another fun thing to do.
yeah. Another thing to add in there.
Yeah. So once you open, we can think about doing some. We was even we booked a couple of interesting people for seminars, for Sambo, to
Yeah,
drive around Australia. But unfortunately, the lockdown called us, so they just had to put this aside for the moment and stick on administrative stuff. But yeah, let's
yeah,
see when we'll be able, hopefully soon we'll be able, to work properly again.
yeah. That's pretty good, exciting stuff for the future.
Yeah, something to look for. Okay,
Yeah,
last question is more like side question, more philosophical one.
yeah.
What is worth fighting for?
What's worth fighting for? Yeah. So I think for me, like, so just looking at it from my point of view, I think when I was fighting, it was always just to test, like just a good way of testing myself, and it was like a good experience. I think so. I never really looked at it as in a career because it wasn't realistic to look at it as a career back then. I still had like a full-time job and everything, but I think I'm really glad that I did fight and compete a lot, or as much as I did when I could, because it gives you a lot of experience, gives you a lot of, I think I just remember the feeling of adrenaline before a fight, after a fight, and I would say that I don't really think everybody has to do it. I don't think everybody, if you're a martial artist, you don't really and not everybody has to have MMA fights, but it's a good way of like a really good way of motivating yourself to continue your training and to improve. Yeah, and sometimes I think that probably people get into it for the wrong reasons as well. Maybe they want to become like a celebrity on Instagram or whatever, and that usually doesn't work out too well. But I think if you do it because, like, as a personal challenge, you've spent a lot, years and years doing martial arts training, you want to put it to the test, and then once you've done it, then you'll know, all right, that was this training has paid off, or this has been worthwhile. So yeah,
I think you learn a lot about yourself, and uh, as you say, I don't think everyone should fight in MMA, but I personally think that some kind of grappling sport should be into school program.
yeah, yeah,
Not striking, strictly some kind of grappling sport. I think that would be awesome. That will help a lot of people, and will solve like many issues that kids have current days. Some kind of grappling sport. It just any kind of grappling sport. Like, if you see like what Japan did with judo, which is in the schools program, and you can see how that translates into society and how people are like organized and respectful in
yeah,
times like that when in the current moment you can see and appreciate that. I think uh, grappling sport in school would be great for anyone who is able to implement.
yeah.
It's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's good for giving people confidence and probably find another option for showing kids how to resolve conflicts.
And discipline
Probably a
and
safe
respect,
way.
there's so much into it. So much into it. And
Yeah,
grappling sport is something that you can practice for a while, and even if you don't really get into it, like on high level for a while without getting injured, but still gives you these very important lessons that I think it's you cannot always do with other sports.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Thanks for that, brother. Was
Okay,
really
all
fun
right.
talk.
Thanks a lot, Seb. Thanks for inviting me on here.
Nice to see you, even through distance. Hope
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be able to
And
see you again soon.
hopefully it won't be too long. We'll see each other in person, get to train together or something.
Yeah, looking forward to it, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, regards to
All right.
everyone.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'll post links to your contacts, and if you can share me one photo that I can use as a cover, that would be awesome.
Okay, great. No problem.
Thanks, brother.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Fight Zone podcast. Subscribe in your podcast app to receive the next episode. Stay strong and stay safe. This episode is brought to you by Tambourine Spring Water. Visit tambourinSprings.com.au or call 0434 952 449 to order your water today. Tambourine Spring Water is a local business situated on Mount Tambourine. Their water is bottled at the source on their 163-meter deep privately owned spring. The spring provides access to a free-flowing underground stream, which is where their premium quality spring water comes from. It then goes through a very strict sediment and UV filtration process to ensure the final product remains both consistent and of brightest quality. It is then bottled and stored until it leaves for the client's home or office. Most water companies in Australia all cart their water from a contractor before being processed and then bottled, which leaves lots of room for contamination and foreign bodies entering the water. In Tambourine Springs, it's a matter of minutes from when the water is extracted from the spring into a bottle, which is then sealed and stored into a cool, dark environment. The spring water is naturally bacteria-free and passes all quality tests prior to filtration. Despite that, Tambourine Springs water have one of the strictest filtration systems, so there is no room for error when it comes to your drinking water. They do not add any chemicals whatsoever to the drinking water. The only thing the filters are doing is removing sand and sediments that comes naturally with the water. The three-stage system is there to ensure no bacteria have found its way into the water. When you purchase your water from Tambourine Spring Water, you know you will receive the best spring water Southeast Queensland has to offer from a local family on a mission to provide the best service and quality. Water companies are often blamed with a good reason for polluting the environment with plastic bottles. This is not the case with Tambourine Spring Water. Your water is delivered to your door in 50 or 20-liter bottles, and your used bottles are collected, disinfected, and refilled again, so zero plastic waste goes into the environment. Me and my family are also using Tambourine Springs water way before they decided to sponsor this podcast. By experience, once you drink real spring water for a while, you cannot drink from the sink anymore or any commercial waters from the supermarket because it smells bad and has bad taste. Ridiculously enough, in Australia you can mix 50% of the water with tap water and label and sell it as spring water. This is not the case with Tambourine Springs water. I personally know the family who owns it, and I have been numerous times in their small factory to see my water being bottled straight from the spring after the filtration process. Majority of my team also purchase their drinking water from Tambourine Springs Water. Find out more at tambourinSprings.com.au or call 0434 952 449 to order your water today.